It is often the case that when a man or a woman comes before me in the analytic chamber with eyes burdened by a strange insistence of the night world, they confess, almost with a tone of embarrassment, that they have been haunted by the same dream again and again, as though the unconscious were a stubborn teacher writing the same lesson upon the chalkboard of sleep, unwilling to allow the waking ego to ignore its message. And here we must remember that the psyche is not merely a casual visitor in our lives. It is the very foundation of our being, a vast and unfathomable sea whose currents carry both our personal memories and the collective inheritance of mankind. And the dream, particularly the recurring dream, is nothing less than a communique from this hidden depth, a voice of the self calling the conscious ego to recognition. For repetition is never accidental. It is the symbol of persistence, a sign that some unresolved tension, some unlived possibility, some truth buried beneath layers of rational resistance demands to be acknowledged, and until it is integrated into the living wholeness of the personality, it will not rest. And so the dream comes back. It returns like a tide, and each time it carries with it an urgency, as if saying, "Look here, this image, this pattern, this forgotten figure, it belongs to you, and you cannot go on without it. And if you wish to know why you keep dreaming the same dream, you must look not at the outer surface of events, but at the archetypal patterns that lie beneath. For the dream is not simply an echo of yesterday's activities. It is a stage upon which the hidden actors of your soul perform their dramas, repeating the scene until the conscious spectator awakens to their meaning. And in this way, the unconscious behaves like an ancient dramatist who refuses to end the play until the audience has learned the moral. And the moral, if we are honest, is always one of wholeness, of reconciling what has been cast out, of meeting the shadow we have denied, of hearing the voice of the anima, or the animus which we have silenced, of seeing the symbol that guides us toward individuation. And so we must approach the recurring dream not as a nuisance, not as an empty echo, but as the most insistent messenger of the soul, a message that repeats itself because we have not yet dared to hear it, because we have not yet taken its image into our lives. And it is precisely this resistance that generates the recurrence. For the unconscious is infinitely patient and yet unyielding, and it will continue to present us with the same picture, until we have faced it, until we have allowed it to transform us. And in this sense, the recurring dream is the symptom of our deepest forgetting, but also the promise of our greatest remembering. And if you have ever woken in the middle of the night, troubled by the same vision that has visited you before, do not dismiss it as accident, but rather recognize that you stand before the threshold of a mystery that longs to be made conscious. And only in the act of conscious recognition does the dream finally release us from its repetition. For once the message is received, the symbol has done its work and can transform into something new. And let us not forget that the dream is not created by the conscious ego. It is born of that deeper intelligence which has existed long before the waking personality appeared. It is the same intelligence that fashioned the myths of our ancestors, that clothed itself in gods and demons, that spoke through the mysteries of Eleusis, that carved its presence into the symbols of every religion. And when it visits us in the night with relentless repetition, it is as though the ancient myth-maker is once again knocking at the door, insisting that we take part in a ritual of renewal. And this ritual is not trivial. It is not a mere psychological curiosity, but rather the ongoing dialogue between the finite consciousness and the infinite unconscious. For the ego, in its pride, believes it knows what it wants. It believes it can direct the course of life according to its own plans. But the unconscious is the greater authority. It carries within it the wisdom of countless ages. It remembers what the individual forgets. It knows the unfulfilled destiny of the soul. And so when the ego strays too far from the path of wholeness, the unconscious begins to stir, to show signs, to repeat images, to insist with dreams that the individual correct his course. And this is why so many recurring dreams have a quality of disturbance, why they leave us unsettled, even terrified, for they are confronting us with what we least wish to face. They are showing us the truth that our waking mind resists, and yet in that very resistance lies the key. For whatever we resist inwardly becomes precisely what returns again and again, magnified and dramatized in the dream, and so the repetition is the echo of our avoidance, the shadow of our refusal, and until we turn toward it with courage, the dream will not leave us in peace. It will be as though an inner figure is standing in the dark, waiting, saying, "You cannot ignore me forever. For I am you, I am the part of you you have abandoned, and I demand to be seen." And when you ask why, the dream repeats. You must therefore ask yourself, what is it within me that I continually push away? What image, what memory, what desire, what fear refuses to die? What has been repressed into the shadows of the unconscious and now returns in symbolic form? Disguised but insistent, demanding reconciliation. And if you examine carefully, you will see that the dream does not simply repeat for the sake of repetition. It evolves subtly, sometimes almost imperceptibly, adding a detail, shifting a gesture, intensifying an emotion, and this shows us that the unconscious is not mechanical but purposeful. It is not a mere machine but a living reality, shaping the symbols of the night in order to lead us toward wholeness. And thus the recurring dream is like a spiral, circling around the same center, pressing us ever closer to the essential truth we must face. And if we have the courage to follow it, to descend into its imagery, we will find that the repeated dream is not our enemy, but our most faithful guide, a teacher who refuses to abandon us, who will stand beside us through every night until we have finally understood the lesson of our own soul. And indeed we must see that the psyche is profoundly ethical in its own way, not moral in the sense of social commandments imposed from without, but ethical in the sense that it strives for balance. It seeks to reconcile the opposites. It wants the neglected to be honored, the wounded to be healed, the forgotten to be remembered, and it will go to extraordinary lengths to achieve this, for the unconscious does not rest until wholeness has been attempted. And the recurring dream is precisely this ethical demand written into the language of symbols. And so if one continually dreams of being chaste, it is the psyche demanding recognition of some hidden fear or desire that has been excluded from life. If one continually dreams of falling, it is the unconscious showing the fragility of the ego's foundation, warning that the edifice we have built cannot hold. If one continually dreams of returning to childhood homes, it is the soul insisting that something in those early years remains unresolved. Something still binds us to the soil of the past, and if one continually dreams of death, it is not always a premonition of literal dying, but often a symbolic demand that we allow an old form of our personality to perish so that new life may emerge. And thus every repetition is an act of insistence, a call toward transformation. And this is why I have said that the dream is the small hidden door to the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul. And when it opens again and again with the same imagery, it is because the soul is crying out, come through, you have delayed too long." And most people, when confronted with such persistence, react with either fear or indifference. They shrug it off or they tremble before it, but they rarely do what is most necessary, which is to engage the image, to enter into dialogue with it, to ask, what do you want from me? What are you showing me? What am I failing to live? And if we do not ask these questions, the dream will continue its cycle. For the unconscious cannot be silenced by ignorance, and the dream will return like an unposturing letter that the psyche keeps delivering until the addressee finally reads it. And the danger, of course, is that if we ignore such messages too long, they will not merely haunt our nights, but will begin to invade our days. For the energy of the repressed does not disappear. It manifests in symptoms, in neuroses, in sudden outbursts of anxiety or depression, and what was once a dream knocking at the door becomes a disorder breaking into the house. And thus the recurring dream is not only a message, but also a warning. Heed the soul before the soul demands to be heard through suffering. And in this sense, the recurring dream is an act of mercy, for it gives us a chance to attend to the unconscious before it erupts in more destructive ways. And though the ego may complain, may say, why do I keep having this same dream? Why will it not leave me alone? The answer is that the dream has not finished its work. The unconscious has not finished its teaching, and the ego must humble itself. It must descend from its throne and listen to the voice that speaks in the night, for only then can the cycle end. Only then can the dream release us from repetition and move us to a new chapter in our inner journey, in the unfolding mystery of why the psyche returns us again and again to the same nocturnal landscape. We must now look more deeply into the archetypal foundation of repetition, for behind the apparent monotony of the dream lies the creative urge of the unconscious, which, like a hidden craftsman, shapes and reshapes the same motif until the ego at last perceives its necessity. And here it is important to recognize that the unconscious does not repeat itself merely to annoy or to torment us, but to teach us in the only language it possesses, the language of images. For long before mankind had the gift of rational speech, he had the language of symbols, and the dream is the heir of that ancient tongue. And so when the same image rises from the depths again, we must treat it as we would treat a sacred text, as a scripture that demands interpretation, as a ritual drama that asks our participation. And in this sense, the recurring dream is a private myth written on the stage of our own psyche. And myths, as I have long insisted, are not lies or superstitions. They are profound revelations of the human spirit. They are collective dreams that once spoke to tribes and nations, and the recurring dream is but the myth of the individual, a myth that insists upon its telling until the soul has heard it fully. And if one considers the recurring dream of the hero's journey, being lost in a labyrinth, being pursued by an unknown figure, being summoned to a task, one sees that these are fragments of the great mythic narratives that have lived for millennia in the collective unconscious, and the persistence of such imagery in an individual's nightly vision shows that the archetype is alive, demanding expression. And we must realize that the archetype is not content to remain hidden. It longs to incarnate in life, and until it does, it will haunt us. It will appear night after night, pressing us toward the path of individuation, which is the unfolding of the whole personality, the integration of shadow, anima, animus, and self. And so the recurrence of the dream is not simply a matter of personal neurosis, but of archetypal necessity, the necessity that each of us must live the myth that is uniquely our own. And if we shirk this task, if we deny the call, then the dream returns like a herald pounding at the gates, reminding us that destiny cannot be silenced. And here we must admit that most of us do not wish to hear such a call, for the call always demands sacrifice. It demands that we leave behind comfort and illusion, that we confront what is most difficult in ourselves, and so we resist, we rationalize, we turn away, and yet the dream is patient, more patient than our resistance, and it returns as often as necessary, for the unconscious is not bound by time, it knows eternity, and it can wait, repeating its images until we finally listen, and thus we find ourselves in the strange condition of being pursued by our own unlived life, haunted not by what we have done, but by what we have left undone. And this is why the same dream comes again and again, for it is the image of the unlived life calling for realization, and we cannot escape it because it is we ourselves who are neglected in it. It is our own soul knocking on the door, and therefore the only way to end the repetition is to begin the living, to take up that unlived potential and bring it into daylight. And if one dreams perpetually of standing before a door but never entering, then one must ask, what threshold in waking life have I refused to cross? What initiation have I delayed? What opportunity have I abandoned? And if one dreams again and again of drowning, one must ask, what emotions have I repressed? What feelings threaten to overwhelm me, because I have not allowed them to be lived in consciousness? And if one dreams of endless examinations, one must ask, before what authority am I always trying to prove myself? What inner judge have I failed to appease? And the pattern is always the same. The dream repeats because the life is incomplete, and the soul cannot rest until its wholeness has been honored. And here lies the profound paradox, that the dream which disturbs us most deeply is the very dream that guides us toward healing, and what we reject as mere annoyance is in truth the call to our greatest fulfillment. And this is why I urge you not to despise the recurring dream, but to approach it with reverence, for it is the voice of the self, and the self is the guiding principle of life, greater than the ego, deeper than consciousness, the totality of what we are and can be. And the self is relentless in its demand that we grow, that we integrate, that we become whole, and so it sends us dreams, and if we do not hear them once, it sends them again, and if still we refuse, it sends them again, until at last we bow our heads and listen, and in that listening begins transformation, and transformation is the very meaning of existence. And now we must descend even deeper into the mystery of the recurring dream. For if in the first stage we recognized it as a message of the unconscious, and in the second as the insistence of archetypal necessity, then in this third reflection we must see it as the drama of individuation itself. For individuation is not a comfortable doctrine. It is not the ego becoming what it wants, but the ego becoming what the self demands, and this is always a process of tension, conflict, dissolution, death and rebirth, and the recurring dream is a living symbol of this process. For just as alchemists in their ancient laboratories repeated the same operations over and over, calcination, dissolution, coagulation, until at last the stone was revealed, so the unconscious repeats its dream motif again and again until the psychic stone, the hidden treasure of wholeness, is brought to light, and thus we can understand the recurring dream as the alchemical fire that will not go out until the substance has been transformed, and the substance is the soul itself, which must be purified of one-sidedness, freed from repression, united with its opposites, and so long as the ego clings to its illusions, the dream repeats, pressing the ego ever closer to surrender, and in this sense the repetition is both a torment and a grace. Torment, because the ego suffers its own obstinacy; grace, because the soul does not abandon the ego, but continues to guide it. And if you look closely, you will see that the recurring dream is never entirely identical. It bears the signature of process, it shifts in detail, it evolves subtly, it shows the psyche working on its own material. And this shows us that the dream is not merely a replay, but a living dialogue. And in that dialogue we are invited to participate consciously, for the unconscious can go so far, but without consciousness its work remains incomplete. And so the dream returns again and again, as if to say, "Join me, meet me halfway, take this image into your waking life. Reflect upon it, act upon it, let it shape your choices." And when this dialogue begins, the repetition often ceases, for the psyche no longer needs to shout when it is finally heard. And this is why those who take their dreams seriously often report that once they understood the meaning of a recurring dream, it disappeared, not because the unconscious has grown silent, but because it has moved forward. It has sent a new message appropriate to the new stage. And thus the rhythm of dreams follows the rhythm of our growth, and the repetition is the sign that growth has stalled, that the ego has not yet caught up with the demands of the soul. And when the ego does catch up, the wheel turns, the dream moves on, and a new symbol arises. And so we must not despise the repetition, but embrace it as a gift, for it is the assurance that the soul has not given up on us, that the self continues to call us, even when we have ignored it for years. And this is why, in analysis, the recurring dream is often the breakthrough point. It is the place where the unconscious insists most strongly, and by working with it, by amplifying its symbols, by connecting it with myths and rituals and personal associations, one can uncover the hidden wound or the hidden potential that demands integration. And often it is in precisely this place that the patient discovers the meaning of his suffering, for the dream shows him what he has lacked, the courage to see, and the repetition shows him that life will not move forward until he has faced it. And in this way the recurring dream is like the figure of the guide in myth who blocks the hero's path until he has answered the riddle. And the riddle is always the same. Who are you really? What have you denied? What must you become? And so long as the answer is avoided, the path remains closed. But once the answer is given, the path opens, and the dream transforms, and the hero moves forward. And thus the recurring dream is a liminal state. It is the psychic threshold where the old cannot continue, and the new has not yet begun. And this liminality is both terrifying and sacred, for it is the place of transformation. And so if you ask me why you keep dreaming the same dream, I must answer, because you have not yet crossed the threshold, because the god or the demon at the gate still waits, because you have not yet offered the sacrifice that is demanded of you, and the sacrifice is always the same, the sacrifice of illusion, the sacrifice of one-sidedness, the sacrifice of the ego's pride, and in return you gain the self, you gain the wholeness that was always your destiny. And so the repetition is not punishment but initiation. It is the rite of passage, written in symbols. And when at last you embrace it, when you surrender to the transformation, then the dream will release you, and you will awaken not only from sleep, but from the sleep of unconsciousness. And in that awakening, you will know that the dream was not an enemy. And now, in this final movement of our reflection upon the riddle of the recurring dream, we must attempt to gather together all that has been said and press still further into its ultimate significance. For the repetition of the dream is not only a message from the unconscious, not only the persistence of archetypal necessity, not only the drama of individuation in process, but in its deepest sense, it is the voice of eternity speaking into time, the call of the self that transcends the boundaries of individual existence and points toward the mystery of life itself. For we must remember that the psyche is not an isolated accident in the drop universe, but an expression of the same creative principle that fashioned the stars. And so when it insists through the recurring dream, it is not merely the little personal ego that is being addressed, but the whole of man as a vessel of meaning. And in this way the recurring dream is a sacrament and a sacred sign of the dialogue between the human and the transpersonal, between the finite and the infinite. And this is why it carries such weight, why it will not leave us in peace until we have responded, because it is not merely about solving a private difficulty, but about aligning the soul with the cosmic order, and to ignore it is to live at odds with the very law of being, while to heed it is to place oneself in harmony with the unfolding of the whole. And so in the repetition of the dream, we hear the echo of the eternal recurrence, that profound intuition that what has not been lived must return until it is lived, that what has not been integrated must appear again until it is integrated, that what has not been loved must confront us again until it is embraced. And this law operates not only within the span of one lifetime, but across generations. For often the recurring dream is not merely personal but ancestral, carrying within it the unlived lives of our forebears, their unresolved conflicts, their buried traumas, their forgotten potentials. And so when you are haunted by the same dream again and again, you may be carrying the weight of his story, the voice of the dead calling for recognition. And this too is part of individuation, for to become whole is not only to integrate one personal shadow, but to redeem the shadow of the family, the tribe, the culture. And this is why recurring dreams so often bear a collective atmosphere. They seem larger than the individual, they carry a numinous charge, as if some god was speaking through them. And indeed it is so, for the archetypes are the gods within, and when they insist, it is as though divinity itself has repeated its demand. And in this sense, the recurring dream is a modern form of revelation. It is the burning bush of the psyche, a sign that will not fade until the message has been received, and the message is always that the ego must humble itself before the greater wholeness, that man must not imagine himself the master of his soul, but must recognize himself as the servant of a greater mystery. And if he does this, then the repetition becomes transformation, the nightmare becomes initiation, the haunting becomes guidance, and life takes on meaning. But if he does not, then the dream will continue. The same images will return, the same fears will chase him, the same doors will remain unopened, until at last suffering forces him to listen. For suffering is the last and most inexorable form of the recurring dream, the dream translated into daylight. And this is why I say that to take the dream seriously is to save oneself from unnecessary suffering, for the dream is the merciful warning, the symbol that repeats in sleep, so that life does not have to repeat its tragedies endlessly in waking. And yet most men turn away, they dismiss their dreams as nonsense, they laugh at them, they forget them, and so they condemn themselves to live in circles, to enact outwardly the same dramas they could have resolved inwardly. And this is the greatest tragedy, to live without reflection, to be pursued by the same fate without ever knowing why. But those who heed the dream, who write it down, who ponder it, who amplify its symbols, who enter into dialogue with its figures, discover that the dream is not their enemy, but their deepest ally, for it gives them knowledge that no conscious reasoning could provide. It connects them to the vast reservoir of the collective unconscious. It offers them guidance suited to their unique path. and it insists upon that guidance until it is received, and so the recurring dream is the most faithful expression of the psyche's care for the soul, for it shows that the unconscious has not abandoned us to drift meaninglessly, but continues to seek our growth. Even if we resist, even if we forget, even if we despair, the dream returns, like a friend knocking again and again until we open the door, and when we open, when we truly listen, then life itself begins to change, for the image once repeated becomes an act.